There is a quiet part of you that the world has never touched. It was there before today began. It remained beneath every conversation, every worry, and every thought that passed through your mind. And it is still here now. Tonight, we're going to explore this quiet place beyond your mind, where nothing needs to be solved and nothing is missing. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Most of us imagine that silence is something we find when everything else stops, when the work is finished, when the mind finally agrees to leave us alone. But the Buddhist tradition points toward another kind of silence, one that does not depend on the world becoming quieter, one that can be present beneath a restless mind, and even beneath the parts of life we cannot control. The Zen masters compared it to the open sky. Storms move through it, but the sky does not struggle with the storm. Clouds gather and disappear, yet the space holding them remains unchanged. In the same way, thoughts and feelings may continue to rise tonight. They do not need to be stopped. They only need space to pass. Let the body relax. Let the words pass through without effort. There is nothing to achieve while you listen. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. For more than 2,000 years, people have carved the same image of the Buddha. He sits with his legs crossed and his hands at rest in his lap. His eyes are soft, half closed. He is doing nothing at all. Of all the moments in his long life of walking, teaching, and meeting people, this is the one his students chose to remember in stone. A man sitting still. Something in us understands why. We spend our days in motion. The body hurries from task to task, and when the body finally sits down, the mind keeps going. It replays the afternoon's conversation. It plans tomorrow. It keeps a running list of everything unfinished. Even in bed, in the dark, it works. And still, the noise thins from time to time. The pause after rain, when the street is washed and quiet. The last light of evening, when the birds settle. The moment of setting down something heavy after carrying it a long way. For a breath or two, the mind rests, and something in us softens, the way it does when we come home. The Buddha had a name for this kind of quiet. When his monks gathered in the evenings, he told them to speak of the teachings or to keep noble silence. He considered silence a form of nourishment, something a person could sit beside the way one sits beside a fire. That longing for stillness is where we begin tonight, because the longing is pointing at something true. The trouble is where we go looking. We treat quiet as a place, somewhere far from here, and we set out to find it. There is an old story, told with small changes in many lands, about a man who traveled a great distance to find what was already his. He was a weaver who lived in a small town beside a river. His life was ordinary. He had his loom, a little house with a courtyard, and enough work to fill his days. But his heart was restless. For years he had carried the feeling that his real life was elsewhere, that somewhere beyond the hills there was a fortune waiting, and with it the ease and peace his town could not give him. One night he dreamed that a voice said to him, "Your treasure is waiting in the capital, beside the great stone bridge." He woke and shook his head at it. But the dream came again the next night, and again the night after, the same voice, the same words. So he closed his shop, told his neighbors he had business in the city, and set out on foot. The road was long. He slept on temple porches and under carts, and after many days, he came over a rise and saw the capital spread out below him, larger and louder than anything he had ever known. He found the great stone bridge easily. It was the busiest crossing in the city. But there was a problem he had not thought of. Soldiers of the watch stood at both ends of it, day and night. A man could not pry up a single stone without being seen. So he waited. Each morning he came and stood near the bridge, watching the crowds, hoping for a chance that never came. He did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, the captain of the watch walked over to him. "You again," the captain said. "Every morning you appear. Every evening you leave. You buy nothing. You sell nothing. You meet no one. Tell me plainly what you want here." The weaver was too tired to invent a story, so he told the truth. "I dreamed 3 nights in a row that my treasure was waiting beside this bridge. I walked a long way because of it." Saying it out loud, I can hear how foolish it sounds. The captain laughed, though there was no cruelty in it. "Dreams," he said. "I will tell you something. 3 nights in a row, I have also dreamed of a treasure. Mine lies buried in some little river town I have never seen, in the courtyard of a weaver's house, under an old fig tree, beside a blue door. Should I march across the country and dig up a stranger's yard on the word of a dream? Go home, friend. A dream is not a map." The weaver thanked him quietly and walked away. He said nothing more, because there was nothing he could say that the captain would believe. The house the captain had described, the courtyard, the old fig tree, the blue door. It was his own. He walked home along the same road. The journey took just as many days, but the road felt different under his feet. When he reached his house, he took a spade to the fig tree he had passed every morning of his life, and he dug. Beneath the roots he found a clay jar, heavy with old gold coins, buried by some hand long before his grandfather's time. It had been waiting a few steps from his own door. People have kept this story alive for 1,000 years, and it was never really about the gold. What we most deeply want tends to be closest at hand, and we often need a long journey before we can see it. The weaver's travels were part of it. He had to stand in the far city and hear a stranger describe his own courtyard before he could recognize what he had. Our own years of searching work the same way. They are part of the road. But somewhere along it, the search turns around and points home. The Buddha's life has this same shape. As a young man, Siddhartha left his home and everyone he loved to search for peace. He studied with the most respected teachers of his time and mastered everything they had to teach, and it was not enough. He went into the forest and lived on almost nothing, disciplining his body past what most people could endure, and still the peace he wanted stayed out of reach. 6 years he searched this way. Then he stopped. He accepted a simple meal of rice and milk, walked to a fig tree beside a river, and sat down. He was finished with chasing. He simply sat through the night, still and awake, asking nothing of the moment. And in that stillness, everything he had been seeking opened on its own. The most famous journey in the history of Buddhism ends with a man sitting under a tree, going nowhere at all. The quiet we long for follows the same law. It does not live in a different house, a different year, or even a different state of mind that we must somehow manufacture. It is our own nature. It is the still ground we are standing on, the ground we have always been standing on. The search is really a homecoming. In the Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's words, there is a verse that says the wise, upon hearing the teachings, become tranquil like a deep, clear lake. A lake does not have to strain to be still. Stillness is simply what water does when nothing is churning it. The depth was always there. The clarity was always there. It only needed the churning to ease. You are like that lake. The busyness on the surface, the ripples of thought and worry, none of it has ever touched the depth of you. This is why moments of quiet feel like coming home rather than arriving somewhere new. You recognize the stillness because it is yours. But here, a question arises. If silence is our nature, why does the world seem so loud? Must every sound stop before we can rest? There is a story of a young flute player who was famous throughout her province. Her skill was astonishing. She had practiced since childhood, and her fingers could do anything. She played the fastest passages without a single flaw, filling every phrase with ornament upon ornament. People came from distant towns to hear her, and they left, shaking their heads in wonder. Yet the old musicians who heard her would grow quiet afterward. One evening, after a performance, an elderly teacher said to her gently, "Your playing is perfect, but it is not yet music." The words stung her, mostly because some part of her already knew. Something was missing from her playing, and she could not name it. So she sought out a master who lived in the hills beyond the province, an old man who rarely performed anymore, but whose playing, people said, could make a whole valley hold its breath. When she arrived, he asked her to play. She played her finest piece, brilliant and swift, note after note like a shower of sparks. When she finished, the old man sat for a while without speaking. Then he picked up his own flute, worn smooth from years of use, and said, "Listen." He played the same melody, but he played it slowly, with far fewer ornaments, and between the phrases, he did something she had never dared to do. He stopped. He let the silence stand there, open, before the next phrase rose out of it. And in those spaces, something happened. The evening itself seemed to enter the music. The stream below the house, the space of the sky, all of it became part of the melody. When the last note faded, neither of them moved for a long moment. "You played fewer notes than I did," she finally said. "Why did it sound like more?" The old man set down his flute. "I did not play fewer notes," he said. "I played the silence too." She waited, and he went on. "You are afraid of the empty spaces, so you rush to fill every one of them. But the music was never only in the notes. Each note is born out of silence, and each note returns to silence. When you honor the silence, every note comes alive. When you fear it, the notes are only noise." The young woman stayed in the hills for a season. Her fingers had nothing new to learn. What she practiced was the pause. She learned to let a phrase end and to rest in the open space that followed until the next phrase wanted to be born. Slowly her playing changed. It grew quieter and it grew far more powerful. The deeper change was in her. Walking home through the mountains at the end of that season, she found that the whole world had become like the master's flute. The bird song, the wind, her own footsteps on the path. Every sound was rising out of a vast silence and returning to it. The silence was the mother of all of it, and it had been there her whole life, holding every note she had ever played. Silence, then, is one thing, and the absence of sound is another. The world does not need to stop for us to be at peace. Sounds rise out of stillness the way waves rise out of the ocean, the way notes rise out of the rest between them. The ocean is never troubled about having waves. There is an old Zen verse that says, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself." The verse describes a person at rest, and around that person, life going on. Grass growing, seasons turning, sounds arising. Stillness and the movement of life were never enemies. The stillness is the field where all of it happens. The old masters put it simply. When you settle back into that stillness, you have gained nothing new. You have become what you always were. You have become the silence. And the longing that runs through a whole life, the pull we feel in the pause after rain and in the quiet of evening, was never really a longing for a quieter world. It was a longing for home. Here is something small to carry from this, with nothing to achieve. Sometime tomorrow, in an ordinary moment, pause for a single breath. Let the sounds around you continue exactly as they are. Just listen beneath them, the way you would listen to the space of a large room. The sounds are happening inside something still. That stillness is not far away, and it does not break. It has been holding your whole life, all along. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, easy breath, and let it leave at its own pace. When you feel ready, we will continue together. Sooner or later, everyone who turns towards stillness makes the same discovery. The moment we decide to be still, the mind grows louder. We sit down in the evening, perhaps, meaning to rest for a while with our eyes closed. Within a minute, the mind has produced a list of everything left undone. Then a conversation from the afternoon returns, wanting to be replayed. Then a song. Then a worry about money, followed by a memory from 15 years ago, followed by the question of what to cook tomorrow. It can be astonishing to watch. We asked for a few minutes of peace, and the mind answered with a marketplace. Then comes a conclusion, arriving so naturally that we hardly notice ourselves drawing it. Something is wrong with me. Other people must have calmer minds than this. Whoever stillness was made for, it was not made for me. Nearly everyone who has ever turned inward has drawn this conclusion at some point, and it is mistaken from top to bottom. The complaint itself is ancient. People were bringing it to the Buddha 2,500 years ago. The mind wanders, they told him. It will not stay where we place it. It is restless, hard to hold, going wherever it pleases. He never scolded anyone for saying so. He once compared the untrained mind to a fish lifted from the water and laid on dry ground, flipping and turning this way and that. There is sympathy in that image. He knew the restlessness from the inside, because he had sat through many long nights with his own unquiet mind in the years before his awakening. And what he taught again and again was that the busy mind is not the problem. The trouble begins the moment we make an enemy of it. Among the Buddha's students, there was a young monk who had grown up in a wealthy home. Before he gave that life away, he had been a musician, and by every account a gifted one. His instrument was the lute. He had played since boyhood, practicing in the cool of the mornings, and people who heard him said the strings seemed to answer him before his fingers arrived. When he heard the Buddha teach, something in him turned, and he left his home, his inheritance, and his music to take up the robe. He brought with him the only way of working he had ever known, which was total devotion. He decided he would practice harder than anyone in the community. While the other monks rested in the shade through the heat of the day, he continued. He took up walking meditation and paced the same path beside his hut hour after hour, back and forth, until his legs trembled and the soles of his feet were sore. He believed that if enough effort could master an instrument, enough effort could master a mind. But a mind is not a lute, and his would not obey. The harder he pressed it towards stillness, the more it scattered. Months went by. His body grew thin and tired, and his practice, instead of ripening, turned to dust in his hands. One evening he sat alone at the edge of the path he had worn into the ground, and a thought rose in him with the weight of a verdict. I have given this everything I have. No one here has strained harder than I have, and I am no closer to peace than the day I arrived. Perhaps I am not suited to this life. Perhaps I should go home, live decently, be generous with what I have, and be content with that. Word of his struggle reached the Buddha, who walked out to where the young monk sat and settled beside him. He asked what was troubling him, and the young man admitted everything, down to his thought of leaving. The Buddha did not argue with him, and he did not tell him to try harder. Instead, he asked, "Before you came here, you were a musician. Is that true?" "It is." "Then tell me, when the strings of your lute were tightened too far, how did it sound?" The young monk considered. "Harsh. The notes had no life in them, and a string drawn that tight will soon snap. And when the strings were too loose, then there was hardly any sound at all, nothing you could call music. And when they were neither too tight nor too loose, but tuned evenly between, then the lute sang." The Buddha nodded. "It is the same with effort," he said. "Drawn too tight, it becomes strain, and strain makes no music. Left too slack, nothing wakes at all. Tune your energy as you once tuned your strings, and let the mind find its own voice." The young monk sat with this long after the Buddha had gone. He knew tuning. He had done it 10,000 times, leaning close to the strings, listening, easing a peg a hair's breadth at a time. It had never once been an act of force. It had always been an act of listening. He stayed. He kept practicing, but the fever went out of it. He walked his path at an ordinary pace and stopped treating his own mind as an opponent to be broken. And in the years that followed, the old texts tell us, he came to be counted among the foremost of the monks, known for exactly the peace that had once refused him. When we go to war with our own minds, the war tends to end in one of two places. The first is surrender. We try to force the thoughts down. We fail, and we quietly conclude that the failure is ours. Stillness must be for a different kind of person, someone naturally serene, someone whose mind was better made. So we set the whole thing aside. And the sad part is what we carry away, a small private verdict. I could not do it. That was never true in the first place. Nobody fails at having a busy mind. A busy mind is the starting point of every person who ever found peace, including the man whose statue now sits so still. The second ending looks, at first, like victory. With enough clenching, the mind really can be pressed into a kind of silence. Hold the attention hard enough on a single point, and for a while the thoughts do fall away. It can feel serene, even blissful, and it is easy to believe the work is done. But it is the stillness of a held breath. It lasts exactly as long as the pressure lasts. The moment ordinary life resumes and the grip eases, everything that was pushed down comes back up, and usually with more force than before, because nothing was resolved. It was only postponed. A silence made by pressure is rented, never owned. Both endings grow from the same root, an assumption planted so deep that we rarely notice it. The belief that thoughts should not be there at all. But thinking is not a malfunction. The mind produces thoughts as the heart produces heartbeats. It is what the organ does, and it does its work on our behalf, day and night, asking no thanks. Thoughts kept our ancestors alive in dangerous country. Thoughts let us plant in spring, find our way home in the dark, hold a friend's face across years of absence. With thought we imagine how our words might land before we speak them, which is the beginning of tact, and we picture the weight another person is carrying, which is the beginning of compassion. Every act of kindness was a thought first. To condemn thinking is to condemn something woven into the center of being human. The Buddha never asked anyone to stop thinking. He asked us to know our thoughts, to see which ones lead toward peace and which lead away from it. And that seeing requires the thoughts to be allowed to appear. A mind at war cannot see anything clearly because the war itself is loud. A person wrestling their own thoughts is not resting, however motionless the body looks. Two voices arguing make noise, even when one of them is arguing for silence. So force cannot bring the mind to rest. What can? Long ago in China there lived a farmer who could not wait. He had flooded his paddy and planted it with young rice, row upon row of thin green shoots, standing in the shallow water. It was good land and good seed, and everything had been done properly and in season. Each morning he walked out to inspect the field, and each morning the seedlings looked to him exactly as they had the day before. He crouched low over them. He squinted. He measured one shoot against his finger and could find no change at all. He began visiting the field twice a day, then 3 times, and the more he looked, the slower the rice seemed to grow. It did not help that his neighbor's paddy lay just across the path. To the farmer's worried eye, the neighbor's rice looked taller every time he passed it, greener, sturdier, altogether more promising. He said nothing to anyone, but he began to sleep badly. A slow field means a thin harvest, he told himself in the dark, and a thin harvest means a hard winter. His wife watched him pacing one night. "The rice knows how to grow," she said. "It has known for 10,000 years. Your worry does not reach the roots." "Something must reach them," he muttered, and went on pacing. Then one warm afternoon an idea came to him, and in the moment of its arrival it felt like wisdom. If the rice was slow to rise, he would help it rise. He waded into the paddy, bent to the first seedling, took it between 2 fingers, and drew it upward out of the mud, just a little, the width of a fingernail. Then the next one, and the next. He worked his way down the row and back up the one beside it, hundreds of shoots, then thousands, easing each one higher. The sun crossed the whole sky while he worked. By dusk he had finished the entire field, and every stalk in it stood taller than it had that morning. He came home muddy to the waist and aching, but glowing. "I am worn out tonight," he announced, "and I have earned it. I have spent the whole day helping the rice to grow." His son looked up. "Helping it how?" "Go and see for yourself. The whole field stands taller." The boy ran out while there was still light and stopped at the edge of the paddy, and his heart sank. Row upon row of seedlings hung limp over the water, their fine roots torn from the soil that fed them. Nothing could be done. Within a few days the field had withered. The farmer was not a fool. He was something far more familiar. He was impatient, and impatience convinced him that growing could be hurried by pulling. What he forgot, for one costly afternoon, is that a farmer's work was never to make the rice grow. No farmer has ever grown a single grain of rice. The work is the conditions. He floods the field, tends the soil, keeps the weeds back, mends the low wall that holds the water in. Then he leaves the rice alone, and the growing happens by itself, mostly at night, while nobody is watching. The settling of the mind follows the same law. Stillness cannot be pulled up out of us, and every tug tears something at the root. What we can do is 10 conditions. We can sit down. We can let the body soften. We can allow thoughts to be present without joining each one that passes. And then the settling comes on its own, at its own hour, unforced, like rice growing in the dark. Shunryu Suzuki, the Japanese Zen master who carried his tradition across the sea to America, gave this a memorable image. The best way to control a cow, he taught, is to give it a wide meadow. Penned in a narrow yard, a cow frets and pushes at the fence. Given space, it wanders a little, grazes, and before long lies down in the grass of its own accord. The mind is the same animal. Cornered, it runs harder. Given room, and watched without alarm, it settles by itself. So this way of being with the mind is closer to hospitality than to combat. A thought arrives. We see it arrive. We let it cross the open field of attention without chasing it and without building a fence around it. Most thoughts, granted that freedom, simply keep walking. A few will circle back, and they can be received the same way, once, twice, 100 times, with no quarrel. And each time one passes through unfought, the field feels a little wider, and something in us begins to trust what all of this has been pointing toward. The silence underneath was never in danger. It needs no defending. It is what every thought is passing through. This is why the masters insist that peace is not built. It is what remains when the struggle is set down. The mind was never the enemy. Looked at closely enough, there was never an enemy at all. Carried into ordinary days, this asks almost nothing of us. On a crowded afternoon, when the mind is running fast, the old reflex speaks first, the inner voice saying, "This should not be happening." And right beside it stands another possibility, simpler and kinder. The mind is doing its work, as the heart is doing its work and the lungs are doing theirs. Nothing has gone wrong. Often that single dropped quarrel does more for us than an hour of forcing ever could, because it is not one more effort. It is the end of one. Let us take a moment here. Feel one breath arrive and leave on its own, and when it feels right, we will go on together. A thought can do something remarkable. It can replace the world. It happens in small ways all day long. We walk a street we have walked 1,000 times and arrive home having seen none of it, because the whole walk was spent inside an imagined conversation. We read a full page of a book and reach the bottom holding nothing, because somewhere in the second line the mind slipped away to tomorrow's errands. We sit in a warm, safe room in the evening, and a memory arrives, something someone said days ago, and within seconds, the room is gone. We are inside the memory, hearing the words again, composing the reply we wish we had given. The lamp, the chair, the hour, all of it goes on without us. Later we come back, blinking, unable to say how long we were away, The Buddha placed this observation at the very front of his teaching. The Dhammapada, the most beloved collection of his sayings, opens with it. Mind comes first, he says there. All experience is led by mind, shaped by mind, made by mind. Before we ever touch the world directly, thought has painted a picture of it, and the picture is what we mostly live in. We respond to the painted stranger, the painted tomorrow, the painted version of ourselves. The painting itself is no problem. The mind is a painter by nature, and many of its pictures serve us well. The difficulty lies in one small forgetting. We forget that it is a painting. We take the picture for the world, and then we live inside the picture, with our whole body and our whole heart. In old India, there was a cloth merchant who travelled between market towns on foot, carrying his goods in a bundle on his back. One season, evening overtook him while he was still far from the town he was bound for. His legs were tired, and the light was failing, so he was glad to see a rest house by the roadside, a plain mud-walled building where travellers could pass the night for a small coin. The keeper, an old woman, took his coin, showed him to a little room at the back, and left him a lamp with very little oil in it. He set down his bundle and stretched his shoulders, and as the small flame steadied, he saw it. Along the far wall, half in shadow, lay a snake. A large one, thick as his wrist, coiled upon itself, utterly still. He backed carefully out of the room and found the keeper at her fire. "There is a snake in the room," he said, keeping his voice low as if it might overhear. "A big one, against the far wall." The old woman was banking the coals for the night and did not look up. "Travellers have slept in that room for 30 years, she said. "Keep to your side, and it will keep to its side. Nothing in that room has ever harmed a guest." This comforted him a good deal less than she seemed to expect. But the road outside was dark, and the next shelter was hours away, so he went back in. He dragged his sleeping mat into the corner farthest from the wall and sat down with his back against the door, where he could watch. Before long, the lamp used the last of its oil and went out. Sleep would not come. His eyes kept returning to the place where the dark shape lay. Every small sound of the night seemed to come from that corner, the wind in the thatch, a leaf brushing the wall outside. He told himself the old woman was probably right, and then looked again, just to be sure. The shape never moved. The hours passed slowly, and he passed them watching. Toward morning he dozed a little, upright against the door, though he could not have said when. What he remembered afterward was the doorway turning grey, then faintly gold, and the room slowly giving up its darkness. He leaned forward. Then he rose, stiff from his long watch, and crossed the floor one slow step at a time until he stood over the shape that had kept him from his sleep. It was a coil of rope. Old rope, frayed at one end, left behind by some earlier traveller. He stood over it a long while. Then he picked it up, felt its dry, ordinary weight in his hands, and carried it out to show the keeper. She glanced at it and nodded, unsurprised. "You are not the first," she said, reaching for her broom. Over the years, many a traveller has seen a snake in that room. It was always this same piece of rope. The snake never existed. The suffering did. A whole night of it. The lost sleep, the watchfulness, the weariness he carried into the next day's walking. All of it real, and all of it produced by a thought. The rope did nothing, all night long. The story about the rope did everything. Consider what actually stood between that man and a night of rest. nothing that could be touched. If the lamp had held oil for 1 minute longer, he would have crossed the room, seen frayed hemp, and slept until birdsong. Same room, same floor, same coil against the wall. 2 entirely different nights, and the only difference between them was a sentence believed. Here the story stops being about a merchant and becomes about all of us. The body cannot tell the difference between what is happening and what we are telling ourselves is happening. When the mind says danger, the body stands guard, whether the danger is in the room or only in the thought. Told to worry, the chest tightens around a tomorrow that has not arrived and may never arrive. Rehearsing an argument, the jaw sets against a person who is miles away and thinking of something else entirely. Blame in the mind becomes heat in the body. Dread in the mind becomes a stone in the stomach. We spend real strength on painted troubles and then wonder at our tiredness. None of this makes the merchant foolish. In failing light, with tired eyes, anyone might see a snake in a rope. The mind works from sketches, quick outlines drawn in an instant from whatever light is available, and most of the time its sketches serve us. The trouble is only that we forget they are sketches. We take the outline for the thing itself, and then we live inside the outline. The Chinese Zen master Huang Po pointed straight at this more than 1,000 years ago. The wise, he taught, let go of their thoughts about things, while the foolish hold on to their thoughts and let the things themselves slip away. It can sound abstract until we picture the merchant pressed against the door, gripping a snake all night in his mind, while the plain rope lay on the floor, asking nothing of anyone. And losing sleep is the smaller cost. A believed thought can also change how we see the people around us, and it does this so smoothly that we rarely catch it happening. There is a story from ancient China about a farmer and a missing sickle. He went to the shed one morning to begin his work, and the sickle was not on its hook. He searched the shed, then the house, then the shed again, moving the same baskets twice. Nothing. And while he searched, a thought arrived, fully formed, the way such thoughts do. The neighbor's son. The boy had walked past the field only 2 days before. He had lingered near the gate, hadn't he? He had looked at the shed, or in the direction of the shed, or might have. The more the farmer turned it over, the more certain he became, and by the time he gave up searching, the matter was settled in him. The next morning he stood at his gate as the boy passed on the road, and everything he saw confirmed it. The boy's walk was hurried, the walk of someone with a thing to hide. His greeting was thin and came a beat too late. He did not quite meet the farmer's eye. That evening the farmer said to his wife, "I know who took my sickle. The neighbor's boy." She looked up from her mending. "Did you see him take it?" "I did not need to. Watch him tomorrow when he passes. Watch how he walks, how he speaks. Everything about that boy is a thief." His wife was quiet for a moment. "Then watch a while longer," she said, "before you speak of this beyond our door." Days passed, and each day the boy walked by, and each day the farmer's case grew heavier without a single new fact. The boy's shoulders were hunched with guilt or squared with defiance, depending on the morning. If he greeted the farmer, the greeting was false. If he passed in silence, the silence was proof. There was nothing the boy could have done, no way he could have walked or spoken that would not have fed the story. Then one afternoon, clearing the ditch at the far edge of his field, the farmer's foot struck something under the wet leaves. Metal. He bent down and lifted out his sickle, exactly where he had set it down weeks before and forgotten it, the day the rain had hurried him home. He stood in the ditch holding it for a long moment. Then he cleaned it on his sleeve and walked back and said nothing to anyone. The next morning the neighbor's son passed the gate as usual. The farmer watched him go by. The boy's walk was the ordinary walk of a boy going to his work. His greeting was open and easy. There was nothing in his face but the morning. Nothing about the boy had changed. Not one thing. Only the story had changed. For days, that farmer lived beside a thief who did not exist. A living person, walking past his gate each morning, had been quietly replaced by a thought. And the thought did what believed thoughts do. It gathered evidence. It colored everything it touched. A hurried step became guilt. A late greeting became a confession. The boy himself, all those days, was simply a boy walking to his work. He never knew that in the house across the path he had been living as a thief. We do this more often than we would like to know. We carry stories about the people around us, assembled from a handful of moments and completed by imagination, and then we meet the story instead of the person. Someone is difficult, someone is careless, someone does not respect us, and every encounter is read by the light of the verdict, so the verdict only deepens. Meanwhile, the actual person walks past the gate, unknowable and alive, mostly thinking about their own troubles. We carry stories about ourselves too, and these may be the ones we believe most deeply. I always give up on things. I am behind everyone I know. I am not the kind of person things work out for. Sentences like these get mistaken for facts, and then a life begins to arrange itself around them, exactly as the farmer's mornings arranged themselves around a thief who was never there. A thought, even a true one, is a sliver. It can be a useful map, but no map is the territory, and no thought is large enough to hold the whole of a person, or the whole of a day, and certainly not the whole of what we are. The freedom in all this is simpler than we might expect, because it asks for no battle. When the farmer found the sickle, the spell broke by itself. He did not wrestle the thief's story down, or argue himself out of it, or replace it with a kinder one. Seeing was enough. The rope needed only morning light. And in the same way, when a story has us in its grip, one honest look can loosen it. Is this the world, or a picture of the world? The question needs no answer. Just asking opens a little distance, and in that distance the picture becomes a picture again, and the world comes back, larger and kinder than the story ever was. It is a little like sitting in a theater. The film can be gripping. We lean forward, our heart races with it, and for a while there is nothing else. Then comes the moment of remembering the seat beneath us and the beam of light overhead. The film keeps playing. Nothing on the screen has to stop or be fixed. But we have come back to where we actually are, and where we actually are is still. That stillness is the same one we have been returning to all evening. Thoughts pass across it like reflections crossing water, and the water holds every one of them without being carried off by any. We come home to the silence, not by stopping the film, but by remembering where we sit. In ordinary days, this can live in us as one small habit of heart. When a verdict about someone feels absolutely certain, or a picture of tomorrow feels absolutely solid, that very certainty can serve as a bell of mindfulness. The tighter a story grips, the more likely we are holding rope in the dark. There is nothing to fix in such a moment, and no one to blame, ourselves least of all. There is only the possibility of letting the morning light arrive a few hours early. We will pause here for a breath or two. Let the shoulders soften and the hands rest. Whenever you feel ready, the path continues. Who are you? It sounds like the simplest question in the world, and we have answers ready. A name, a trade, a family position, a history with its bright chapters and its regrets, and beneath those, quieter answers we rarely say aloud. I am the responsible one. I am the one who never quite belongs. I am the strong one, the anxious one, the one who was never given a fair chance. These inner answers are the oldest stories we own. Most were drafted early, out of a handful of moments, a word of praise, a failure at the wrong time, a comparison overheard through a doorway. Then they were rehearsed, told and retold, year after year, until they stopped sounding like stories at all and began to sound like plain fact. By now, we do not so much tell them as live inside them. As a fish lives in water, it has never once noticed. 15 centuries ago, a monk from India named Bodhidharma crossed the sea to China, carrying the meditation teaching that would one day be called Zen. The emperor himself summoned this famous master to court. The emperor had built temples, copied scriptures, supported monks by the thousand, and he expected to be told of the merit he had earned. Bodhidharma told him plainly that there was no merit in any of it, and the conversation went badly from there. At last the emperor, unsettled by this strange guest, demanded, "Who is this, standing before me?" Bodhidharma answered, "I don't know." He was not being difficult, and he was not confused. He knew his name, his lineage, his long journey across the water. What he declined to do was hand the emperor a label and pretend the label was the man. His answer came from a freedom most of us have never tasted, the freedom of not mistaking any description for what we are. Because that mistake is the quietest prison there is. We have seen how a believed thought can turn a rope into a snake and a neighbor's boy into a thief. The story we believe most completely of all is the story called me. And a story, however familiar, is always smaller than the one it describes. Long ago, in a mountain province, there lived a woodcutter. Every morning he climbed the slopes with his axe, and every evening he came down bent under his bundle, and every night his back ached. One day, resting in the shade at midday, he watched a silk merchant pass on the road below, carried in a cushioned litter, fanned by servants, going somewhere pleasant without moving a muscle of his own. The woodcutter sighed from the bottom of his heart. "If only I were a rich merchant," he said, "then I would be happy." Now, the mountain he worked was old, and old mountains are said to listen. A voice like wind over stone replied, "As you wish." And it was so. He found himself a merchant of silk, reclining on cushions of his own, with warehouses on the river and gold in lacquered chests. For a season it was wonderful. He ate what he pleased and slept past sunrise. Then one day the road was cleared for a procession, and he was made to wait in the dust with the farmers and the carters while the king passed by, and every head around him bowed low, including, he noticed, his own. The old ache returned, in a new place. "A merchant is nothing," he said. "If only I were the king." "As you wish," said the voice. and he was the king. Palaces, banners, 1,000 servants, ministers hanging on his smallest word. For a season it was wonderful. Then came the height of summer, and he sat sweating beneath his heavy robes of state while the sun poured down on king and beggar alike, caring nothing for crowns, commanding the whole sky without lifting a finger. So there is something above a king, he said slowly. Let me be the sun, as you wish. And he was the sun, mighty and golden, ripening the harvests of 100 valleys, drying rivers when he chose. Until one afternoon a cloud drifted across his face, and all his brilliance could not pierce it, and the fields below went dark without his permission. The cloud is greater, he said. Let me be the cloud. He was the cloud, and he poured rain in torrents, flooding roads, turning streams into rivers, and the world hurried for shelter wherever he went. But the mountain beneath him did not stir. Rain or shine, storm or calm, it stood exactly as it had stood for 10,000 years. The mountain is greater than all of them, he said. Let me be the mountain. As you wish, said the voice, and he was the mountain, older than kingdoms, taller than clouds, unmoved by everything under heaven. At last, he thought, there is nothing beyond this. Then, from far below, near his foot, he felt a small, steady tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Something was chipping away at him, flake by flake, and all his greatness could do nothing to stop it. He looked down. It was a woodcutter, working with an axe. They say the voice granted him one final wish, and that he asked, in a small voice, to be a man again. He walked home to his own hut that evening, lit his own fire, and sat down among his old tools. Everything was exactly as he had left it. Only his eyes had changed. Every identity in that chain was real while he wore it, and everyone came with the same small itch. Merchant, king, sun, cloud, mountain. Each felt like the answer for a season, and each turned out to be one more costume with a draft in it. The circle finally taught him what no single wish could have taught. There is no top. The ladder of better selves goes around, not up. It helps to notice the engine that drove him from wish to wish, because it runs in us too, and it runs on two words. If only. If only I were the merchant, then. If only I were the king, then. The then is where happiness is kept, always, exactly one costume away. If only I were more disciplined, more accomplished, more admired, more at peace, then I could finally rest. And the strange thing about this engine is that it survives every success. Reach the wish, and the engine simply loads the next one, because its real product was never any particular self. Its product is the feeling of not yet. Here is the part that is easy to miss. All of this holds true even for the kind stories. Trading a harsh self-image for a flattering one is a real relief, as changing out of a rough coat into a soft one is a relief, and there is nothing wrong with kinder inner sentences. They are good medicine, and sometimes they are the medicine a person needs for years. But a soft coat is still a coat. Someone who has replaced I am a failure with I am strong and capable is still living inside a description, and a flattering description must be maintained. It needs performances. It needs comparisons won, proof gathered and gathered again, and it grows nervous on the days when the evidence runs thin. It is a landlord with pleasant manners, and rent is still due every month. The Buddha's teaching goes further than better stories. It asks what is underneath all of them. Because something is underneath. Every costume in the woodcutter's long adventure was worn by someone. Every self-image we have ever held was held in something. The descriptions come and go. Whatever reads them remains. So the question returns, closer now. If every answer to "Who are you?" is a garment, what is it that wears them? In India, they have told a story about this for many generations. 10 young students had finished their years with a teacher and set out together for home. Their road crossed a river, swollen with the early rains, and there was no bridge and no boatman, so they joined hands and waded across, the water pulling hard at their legs, each one calling encouragement to the others until they climbed out on the far side. There on the bank, dripping and out of breath, the eldest gathered them. "Count off," he said. The current was strong. "Let us be sure the river took no one." He counted the young men in front of him, pointing to each chest in turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. His stomach dropped. He counted again, slowly, carefully. 9. "Let me count," said another, and he counted the men standing before him and found 9. One after another, each of the 10 took his turn, and each arrived at the same terrible number, because each of them counted every man except himself. They sank down on the riverbank in grief. One of them was lost, and worse, they could not even say which one, since everyone they looked at was plainly present. They sat with their heads in their hands, mourning a friend none of them could name. A farmer coming along the road stopped at the sight of them. "What sorrow is this?" "We were 10 when we entered the river," the eldest said. "Count us yourself." "We are 9. The farmer looked down the line of them for a moment and understood. "Stand up," he said, "and form a row." He walked along the row, tapping each young man on the shoulder as he counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. The students watched, hardly breathing. 7, 8, 9. He came at last to the eldest, who had counted first and grieved hardest, and rested a hand on his shoulder. 10. You, my friend, are the 10th man. For a heartbeat nobody spoke. Then the eldest began to laugh, with tears standing in his eyes, and the others joined him, laughter and relief pouring out together on the riverbank. No one had drowned. No one had ever been missing. The one they mourned had been doing the counting. The eldest student searched with complete sincerity, and his count was accurate every single time. 9 really was the number of everyone he could see. His mistake was never in the counting. It was that the counter does not appear among the counted. This is our situation, told as plainly as it can be told. When we take inventory of ourselves, we count what can be seen. Roles, memories, qualities, failures, the whole catalogue of the story called me. And the sum never quite feels like the whole. Something always seems missing from it, so we go searching, in achievements, in the opinions of others, in the next revision of the costume. The grief on that riverbank is a familiar grief. Most of us have carried some version of it for years, without ever wondering whether the arithmetic itself was the problem. Yet what is missing was never missing. The one we are looking for is the one doing the looking. The awareness that has read every story we ever told about ourselves has never once appeared inside any of those stories, for the same reason the eldest student never appeared in his own count. It is not one of the items. It is what all the counting happens in. There is a way to feel the truth of this directly. The awareness looking out of our eyes this evening is the same awareness that looked out of them when we were 7 years old. Everything else has changed. The body, the opinions, the fears, the entire cast and plot of the story. And yet something has been here the whole time, simple and awake, present for every chapter without ever becoming one. It has no age. It was not improved by our good years and not damaged by our hard ones. The Zen tradition gives it no biography at all, only a strange and tender name. The original face, the one we had before any story began. This is what Bodhidharma was resting in when he said, "I don't know." Not a blank and not ignorance. A vastness. Meeting it can feel odd at first, like stepping into open country after a life indoors. There is nothing to hold on to. But nothing needs holding. It is the same stillness we have been coming home to all evening, the silence that has worn every costume and was never any of them. In ordinary days, this understanding can live as a certain lightness. When we hear ourselves declare, inwardly or aloud, "I am the kind of person who," we can let the sentence finish and pass. One more thought, crossing the open field. And once in a while, in an unhurried moment, there is the question that asks for no answer. Who is aware of this story? Nothing has to come back. The not knowing that follows is not a lack. It is room. It is the coat coming off at the end of a long day. Let this be a resting place for a moment. There is nothing to work out here. One easy breath, and another if you like, and then we will walk on. When we notice that thinking has carried us off again, a practical question appears. Where do we come back to? The tradition's answer is closer than close. The senses. Thought can roam anywhere, into last year, into next week, into rooms that will never exist. The body cannot. The body hears only this sound, feels only this warmth, this weight, this breath. The senses live in one place, the present, and so every sight and sound and touch is a doorway standing open to it. We already know their power from odd moments. A certain smell drifts from a doorway, and 30 years fall away in an instant. A few notes of an old song, and a whole summer returns. The senses cut through time so easily because they never left the present to begin with. Thought builds its worlds out of pictures of things. The senses touch the things themselves. The Buddha once gave this teaching in its shortest possible form. A seeker had traveled a great distance to find him, walking for days, and finally reached him in the morning hours while the Buddha was going from house to house for alms. The man was too full of his question to wait for a better moment. Right there in the road, he asked for the teaching and asked again until the Buddha stopped and gave it to him whole in a handful of words. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. Only the heard. No commentary added. No story wrapped around the sound, no listener standing back to judge it. Just this, met directly. It sounds almost too simple to be a teaching until we try it and discover how rarely we meet anything that way. Almost always there is the sound, and then instantly the label, the opinion, the association, the drift. The world reaches us wrapped in packaging of our own making. What would it be to hear the world with nothing added? One monk's whole life turned on that question, and on a single small sound. In ancient China there was a monk renowned for his learning. He had studied since boyhood, and his memory was astonishing. Ask him about any sutra and he could recite it. Ask what any master had said on any matter and he could give the words exactly, along with the story of when and why they were spoken. Among the younger monks, he was regarded with awe, and he answered their questions generously, fluently, endlessly. His own teacher was an old master who watched all this with a certain look. One day the teacher said to him, "You know 10,000 sayings, but when you speak, I hear other people's words coming out of your mouth. Show me one word of your own. Tell me something true that you did not learn from anyone." The scholar opened his mouth and found nothing there. Everything he reached for had an owner already. He went back to his hut and searched his shelves of notes, volume after volume in his own careful hand, and every line in them belonged to someone else. For days he returned to the teacher with answers, quotations, brilliant combinations of quotations, and the old man turned each one away without ceremony. Finally, in real distress, the scholar begged him, "Then explain it to me. You see something I do not. Tell me what you see." The teacher shook his head slowly. "I could speak," he said, "and you would remember my words perfectly, and they would become one more treasure in your storehouse that is not yours. My seeing can never be your seeing. If I explained it now, you would thank me today and be poorer for it all your life." The scholar left the monastery soon after. Before he went, he burned his notebooks, all of them, saying, "A painting of rice cakes does not satisfy hunger." He wandered until he came to a small, half-forgotten hermitage in the hills, where a master of former times lay buried, and he stayed on as its caretaker. He gave up trying to solve anything. He swept the paths. He planted vegetables. He mended the roof before the rains came. The seasons went around and went around again, and he grew plain and easy in his ways. One morning he was sweeping the path as usual. The broom caught a piece of broken tile and sent it skipping across the ground, and it struck a stalk of bamboo at the garden's edge. Tock. One small, clean sound, and with it, everything opened. There was nothing between him and that sound. No scholar, no learning, no question, no distance. Afterward he bathed, put on fresh robes, lit incense, and bowed in the direction of his old teacher's mountain, far away. "Your kindness was greater than a parent's," he said. "If you had explained it to me then, this morning could never have happened." And the poem he wrote that day begins simply, "One strike, and all I knew fell away." Years of brilliant study could not do what one piece of tile did in an instant. That is a strange arithmetic, and the whole teaching lives inside it. The sound reached him before his commentary could. For once there was hearing with nothing added. The Buddha's only the heard, arrived at not through effort but through ripeness. All those seasons of sweeping and planting had slowly emptied his hands, so that when the sound came, nothing reached out to grab it, compare it, or file it away. It landed in open space. An open space, it turned out, was what he had been searching for through 10,000 borrowed sayings. There is a reason the tradition points so often to hearing in particular. Listening is receiving, through and through. The eyes aim and select, The hands grasp and turn things over, but the ears simply stand open, and sound comes to them unasked, from every direction at once, even in the dark, even in sleep. We cannot clench our way to better hearing. There is no muscle in it to strain. To listen is to let the world in, and letting in has no ego at the center of it. This is why real listening quiets us from the inside. The inner talker and the deep listener cannot both have the floor. In a moment of complete listening, the commentary rests, not because we silenced it, but because we were occupied with something wider than ourselves. And there is more to listening than the ears. In the Zen tradition, there is a teaching on listening with the whole body, and it is less mysterious than it sounds. Sitting at ease somewhere, it is possible to feel a room as much as hear it. The space of it, the air resting in it, sounds arriving out of that space and dissolving back into it. Attention grows wide instead of narrow, less like a pointed finger and more like a net laid softly on water. In that wide listening, the line between the one who hears and the sound that is heard grows thin. Dogen, the great master who founded the Soto school of Zen, taught that to study the self is to forget the self, and that in forgetting the self, we are awakened by all things. This thinning of the line between listener and sound is where that forgetting quietly begins. The Japanese Zen master Ikkyu was once asked to write down the highest wisdom. He took up his brush and wrote a single word: attention. The questioner, disappointed, asked whether he had nothing more to offer. Ikkyu took up the brush again and wrote, attention, attention. The doorway could not be more available. Sounds arrive all day, unbidden and free. A kettle beginning to murmur. Rain finding the window. A bird somewhere out of sight. A floor settling. A far-off engine fading down a long road. Every one of them happens only now, and so every one of them is an invitation home, delivered to us exactly where we sit. Sometimes a whole tangle of seeking has come undone at a sound as ordinary as rain. There is an account of a monk who arrived at a mountain temple one autumn in the season of long rains. He had been traveling for years, from teacher to teacher, across the whole country, and he carried his questions as a peddler carries wares, carefully wrapped, unpacked, and displayed at every stop. Some teachers he had found wanting. Some had found him wanting. Either way he moved on, and his bundle of questions grew heavier by the year. In the evening he was brought to the old master of the temple, and they sat together while rain came down steadily on the roof. The monk laid out his finest question, one that had defeated several famous teachers, concerning the deepest meaning of the ancestors' words. He presented it well. He had presented it many times. The master listened all the way to the end without moving. Then he said, I could answer you, but would you believe me? Of course, said the monk, leaning forward. You are known everywhere. I would treasure any word you gave me. The master was quiet for a while. The rain went on, dripping from the eaves outside, each drop finding the stone below. At last he said, Do you hear the sound of the rain dripping from the eaves? The monk began to reply and stopped. He listened. Drop, drop, drop on the dark stone. The sound had been there the whole evening, beneath his question, beneath his years of travel, beneath every clever thing he had prepared to say. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he was not on his way anywhere. There was the rain and the hearing of it, and nothing else was needed anywhere in the world. Oh, said the monk. The master poured the tea. Every teaching we have gathered this evening was already falling from those eaves. The rain asks for no belief. It cannot be misquoted, and no story can improve it. Heard completely, the world is exactly what it is, and the trance of thinking finds nothing there to hold on to. The master gave the monk no doctrine that night. He gave him back the place all doctrine points to. There is even a tale of a conjurer who understood this in his own fashion and travelled the market towns of an old kingdom with it. His fame rested on one wonder above all the others. At the close of his performance, when the scarves and the vanishing coins were done, he would raise his hands and announce that for his final marvel, he would teach the entire crowd to disappear. To vanish completely, he said, where no trouble on earth could find them. The crowd would press closer, and he would wait until the whole square had gone still. Do not think about the past, he said slowly. Do not think about what is to come. Do not think about anything at all. A pause, the length of one breath. There, you have vanished. Most laughed and called for their coin's worth. But here and there in the square, someone went quiet and stayed quiet because it had worked. For one breath, there had been no yesterday to regret and no tomorrow to arrange, and the self woven out of those two things had grown thin as smoke. What remained was the market morning itself, the light on the stalls, the sounds, immense and simple. The poet Rumi wrote that he would gladly bow to anyone who could truly set the future down. For the length of a single breath, in a dusty square, the conjurer sold that bow for a coin. Listening does the same work without any stage, and it changes how we are with one another, which may be its deepest gift. To listen to a person completely, without composing our reply while they speak, without checking their words against our story of who they are, is among the rarest things one human being offers another. People feel the difference immediately, the difference between being heard and being waited out. In that kind of listening, we have set ourselves aside entirely, and what remains is open space with room in it for someone else. The old teaching would call this too only the heard. It is also very close to love. Carried into ordinary days, none of this needs to become a discipline. It is more like remembering that the door exists. Somewhere in the day a sound will come, a kettle, a bell, wind moving through leaves, and it can be received for a moment the whole way, with nothing added. One sound, fully met, and we are back. Back in the body, back in the room, back in the only place where life has ever been happening. The silence we have followed all evening is not far from any sound. It is what does the listening. Let us be still together for a little while, resting with whatever can be heard right now, near or far. And when it feels natural, we will continue on. There is a certain kind of tiredness that sleep does not touch. It comes not from doing too much, but from doing everything too fast. The body moves quickly, the mind moves quicker, and the day becomes a blur of half-finished moments, each one abandoned for the next, before it was ever fully arrived in. We eat without tasting. We listen while already planning our reply. We arrive at evening worn thin, and strangely, we can barely remember any of the hours that wore us down. We have inherited a quiet belief that speed is a virtue. Faster is better. more done in less time is a life well spent. The whole world seems to agree, and it hurries us along from the moment we wake. There is a place for quickness, of course, when the harvest must come in before the storm, when a child runs toward the road. But we have let the emergency pace become the everyday pace. We move through calm hours as though we were being chased, and something is lost in the running that we rarely slow down enough to notice. Hurry is not only a fact of the clock, it lives in the body. It settles into the shoulders, drawing them up toward the ears. It shortens the breath and lodges it high in the chest. It tightens something behind the eyes and sets the jaw and keeps the hands a half second ahead of whatever they are doing, already reaching for the next thing before the present one is done. We can carry this bracing for so many years that it stops feeling like tension at all and simply feels like being awake. And then, in some rare, unhurried moment, it lets go. The shoulders drop, the breath falls low and easy, and we are startled to discover how much we had been holding, and for how long. The old traditions understood the worth of slowness in the marrow of their practice. A tea master will spend the better part of an hour preparing what plain thirst could satisfy in a moment, warming the bowl, measuring the leaf, pouring the water in an unbroken thread. A monk will cross a courtyard so slowly that a watching stranger might think something is wrong. None of this is for show, and none of it is waste. It rests on a simple recognition. Some things reveal themselves only at a slower speed, and the deepest of them reveal themselves only when we have very nearly come to rest. The Buddha placed unhurriedness at the very center of the path. He taught a middle way between straining and slackness, and he pointed again and again to a quality the old texts call mindfulness, a clear and gentle awareness of what is actually happening. Mindfulness cannot be rushed, any more than tea can be rushed in the steeping. It arrives at the pace of attention, which is a walking pace, and never a running one. There is a story about a messenger who had to learn this the hardest way there is, by being stopped against his will. Long ago, a young courier served a mountain kingdom, carrying urgent letters between the king's court and the distant lords of the outlying valleys. He was proud of his speed, and with reason. No one covered the mountain roads faster than he did. He knew every shortcut, every shallow place to ford a stream, every goat path that shaved an hour from a climb. A letter placed in his hands at dawn would reach the farthest valley by dusk, and he wore his reputation like a fine cloak. Rest, to him, was a kind of defeat. He took his meals standing and slept as little as he could manage. One spring he was handed the most important task of his young life. A sealed letter to be carried over the high pass to a lord 3 days distant, and the king made it plain that a great deal depended on its swift arrival. The courier was gone almost before the instructions were finished, already working out in his head how he might do the thing in 2 days rather than 3. He climbed hard all morning and made good time. But spring in the high mountains is a treacherous season. By afternoon, the sky had closed over into a low grey ceiling, and snow began to fall on the pass, thick and windless and silent. By early evening, the path itself had vanished beneath the white, and then the wind came up, and he was forced, cursing under his breath, to take shelter in a herdsman's hut that clung to the mountainside above the trail. The old man who lived there took him in without a word and set a pot of broth over the fire. The courier could not sit still. He rose and went to the small window, and came back and went again, watching the snow bury the hours he could not spend. "You are in a great hurry," the herdsman observed at last. "For a man, the mountain has plainly decided to keep a while." "I carry the king's own letter," the courier said sharply. "Every hour I sit idle here is an hour lost forever." The old man went on stirring the pot. "The pass will not open before morning, no matter what your feet want from it. Sit. Eat something. The snow does not take its orders from couriers." There was nothing to be done, and doing nothing was the hardest labor the young man had ever faced, harder than any climb he had made. But there was no path and no light, so at last he sat. He ate the broth, and slowly, having nothing at all to do and nowhere to go, he began, for the first time in years, to simply be where he was. He heard the fire tick and shift in the grate. He heard the wind change its voice as it wrapped around the corner of the hut. He watched the old man's hands, unhurried and sure, and noticed how much was spoken by a face that said nothing. He became aware, almost with surprise, of his own breathing, which had been running fast for so long that he had forgotten it knew any other pace. Little by little, it lengthened and slowed. When at last he lay down beside the fire, something in him had grown still that had not been still in a very long time. He slept more deeply than he could remember sleeping. In the morning, the sky was scrubbed clean and hard and blue, and the pass lay open. The courier thanked the old man and set out, and he still moved quickly, for the letter was still urgent and the Lord was still waiting. But something had changed in the way he traveled. Now he saw the country he was moving through. He saw how the early light came slanting through the pines and turned the fresh snow the color of honey. He saw a hawk hanging motionless on the wind above the valley, riding a current he could not see. He saw 100 small things that had lined every road of his whole life that he had never once noticed because he had always been racing past them towards somewhere he had not yet reached. The letter arrived in good time, but the courier who placed it in the Lord's hands was not quite the same man who had taken it from the king's. The snow took nothing from that young man. It gave him something, though he had to be held still before his hands were open enough to receive it. Everything the racing world had hidden from him, one enforced pause quietly revealed. And what it revealed was not waiting for him in the far valley. It had been lining every road he had ever run down, the whole time. A galloping horse cannot see the deer standing at the edge of the forest. The deer is there, in plain view, but the speed of the rider smears it into the green blur of everything else streaming past. Only when the horse slows to a walk does the deer step forward out of the background and become itself, a living creature, breathing, ears turning, watching back. So much of the world is a deer at the forest's edge. It is not hidden from us. We are simply moving too fast to let it come forward and be seen. The same is true of the people we love. A face we see every day can become a blur, glimpsed in passing on the way to the next task, never quite looked at. And then some evening we slow down and really see them, the particular way they hold a cup, the small lines at the corners of their eyes, and it is as though we are meeting them again after a long absence. They were there all along. Our speed had turned them into scenery. This is one of the quiet costs of a hurried life, that the very things we would say we treasure most slip past unseen, blurred by our haste, waiting for a slowness that too rarely comes. The tea master, pouring water in an unbroken thread, is not being quaint. He is refusing to let this moment, this cup, this guest, become a blur. He is slowing down enough to let life come forward and be met. And slowing does something even stranger than letting us see more. It seems to change what we are. There is a discovery from the study of the very small that gives a picture of this. When certain kinds of matter are slowed almost to perfect stillness, chilled until their tiny inner motions very nearly cease, they stop behaving as separate particles at all. The sharp little boundaries that had made each one a distinct thing begin to blur and soften, and they flow together into a single whole, moving as one body. What appeared to be a crowd of separate specks turns out, at rest, to be undivided. Something in us recognizes that description from the inside. When the mind is racing, the world arrives in separate pieces. This set against that, me here and all the rest out there, and the sense of division feels sharp and obvious and permanent. As the mind slows and settles, those hard edges begin to soften as well. The firm line between ourselves and the evening air around us grows faint. The one who listens and the sound that is heard draw close to one another, as we found at the temple with the falling rain. There comes a growing sense that things are far less separate than our speed had led us to believe, that beneath the busy divided surface, everything is quietly of one piece. The contemplatives of every tradition have said as much for thousands of years in 100 different tongues. What is striking is how consistently they point to the same doorway: stillness. Slow down enough, grow quiet enough, and the seams in the world begin to disappear. This is why the way of practice is so often a way of slowing. Not because slowness is holy in and of itself, but because at speed, the world stays broken into fragments, and the self stays hard and separate, while in slowness, the edges begin to melt, and something whole and quiet shows through the gaps. Carried into ordinary days, this asks for very little, and it cannot be forced, since force is only speed wearing a calmer face. It is more a matter of letting a few things take the time they actually take. Drinking something warm without also doing 3 other things at once. Walking from one room to the next as though the walking itself counted for something, rather than only the arriving. Letting one moment come to its natural end before reaching for the next. Each small slowing is a place where the blur can resolve back into a deer, where the endless racing can ease for a breath, and where the world, given the smallest chance, quietly draws closer than it was. Let us slow down together now, just for a moment. One unhurried breath, taken fully, at its own pace. And when you are ready, we will go on. Slowing down carries us a long way, but there is a place it cannot quite reach, and to arrive there, something more is asked. Not slower motion, a full stop. This is difficult to hear at first. So much of what we have been taught about bettering ourselves involves adding something, doing something more. If peace has not yet come, we assume the answer must be a better technique, a harder push, some missing method we have not yet found. And here the path turns and says something that sounds almost backward. The quiet we are looking for is not reached by doing more. It is what shows itself when the doing itself comes to rest. There is a trap hidden inside the very search for stillness, and it catches the sincere far more often than the lazy. The harder we chase quiet, the more the chasing fills the mind with its own commotion. Straining to relax, we grow tense with the strain. Reaching for peace, we disturb the peace with the reach. A person can spend years pursuing calm in a manner that guarantees they will never find it, because the pursuit is itself a form of running, and no one has ever arrived at stillness by running toward it. Even the Buddha's awakening, in the end, was not a thing he seized by force. For 6 years he had strained after it with everything he had, and it stayed out of reach. It came only when the straining was finished and set down, when he sat beneath the tree with nowhere left to go and nothing left to chase. There is an old saying that only in a still pond can you see the moon. A pond thrashed by wind and oars shows nothing but broken, scattered light. The moon was always there, waiting on the surface. It appears the moment the water is left alone. There is an old image that shows, better than any argument, why our efforts to force peace so often defeat themselves. Picture a man in a small boat on a wide lake toward evening. He has rowed out onto the water because he has heard that the middle of the lake holds a great peace, a stillness unlike anything to be found on the crowded, noisy shore. And he wants that peace badly. So he bends to the oars and drives himself toward the center as fast as his arms will carry him. He reaches the middle at last, breathing hard, and finds the water there, churning and rough, with no peace in it at all. He frowns. Wrong spot, he decides. The stillness must be over there, near the far shore where the water looks smoother. So he wheels the boat around and rows off toward it, pulling harder now, throwing up spray with every stroke. But that place too is churning and unquiet by the time he arrives. So he turns again and races to another, and then another, crossing and recrossing the whole lake, growing angrier and more exhausted with each stretch of water, and everywhere he goes, he finds the surface disturbed and broken. What he cannot see, in the middle of all his effort, is the cause. The lake was calm before ever he began. It is his own rowing that churns it. Every hard pull of the oars sends waves rolling out ahead of him across the surface, so that he is forever rowing straight into the wake he himself made a moment before. He is chasing a stillness that his own chasing destroys. The faster he hunts for calm water, the more the water heaves and breaks, because the hunting is the very thing breaking it. There is only one thing he can do, and it is the single thing his whole frantic search has kept him from doing. He can stop rowing. He can lift the dripping oars from the water and lay them across his knees and let the boat drift and simply wait. And when he does, something begins to happen entirely on its own, with no help from him at all. The waves he made roll outward and grow smaller and fade. The spray settles back into the surface. The rocking of the little boat slows and slows again and gradually gentles into stillness. And in its own time, by its own quiet nature, the whole surface of the lake smooths itself into a dark mirror until the first stars appear there, perfectly still, exactly as they had been waiting to do all along. He did not make the stillness. He could never have made it. All his rowing only pushed it further off. The stillness was the lake's own nature, and it revealed itself the instant he stopped disturbing it. We spend a great deal of our lives rowing. We row toward a peace we imagine lies just ahead, over there, a little further on, and the rowing is the very thing standing between us and it. The answer is not to row better or to row toward a wiser part of the lake. The answer is to notice that we are rowing at all and to let the oars come to rest. Stopping, in this sense, does not mean the body must freeze or that we must abandon our work and our responsibilities and our care for the people who depend on us. It is an inner gesture. It is the release of a subtle, ceaseless effort we scarcely know we are making. If you look closely, you may catch it. Underneath the surface of an ordinary day, there is almost always a faint bracing, a leaning forward, a quiet pressure pushing against this moment to hurry it into some better moment just up ahead. Stopping is the gentle decision to cease that pushing, to let this moment be the one we are actually in, rather than a stepping stone we step on only to reach the next. The Buddha himself once taught this with water, near the end of his life. He was traveling and grew thirsty and asked one of his companions to fetch drinking water from a small stream nearby. But a train of carts had just crossed the stream at the ford, and the wheels had churned the shallow water to mud, and the man came back and said the water was too disturbed to drink and suggested they walk on to the next river. The Buddha did not walk on. He simply asked him to wait and to go back a little later. When the man returned to the stream some while after, the mud had drifted down and settled of its own accord, and the water ran clear and bright over the stones, fit to drink. Nothing had been added to it. Nothing had been done to it. It had cleared itself in the only way muddy water ever clears, by being left in peace. The mind is exactly the same. When it is stirred and clouded, there is nothing to add and nothing to scrub away. There is only the patience to stop stirring and to let it be, and to trust the settling that follows on its own. The clarity we want is not manufactured. It is what is already there, once the mud has been allowed to rest. Notice what the companion in that story wanted to do. He wanted to walk on, to find another river, to solve the problem by going somewhere else and doing something more. And this is almost always our first instinct. When the water is troubled, we look for a better stream. When the mind is troubled, we reach for another method, another book, another technique, some new activity to fix the disturbance. But the Buddha's instruction was to do the one thing that feels like nothing at all. Wait. Stay. Let it settle. The trouble was never that the stream was the wrong stream. The trouble was only that it had been stirred, and stirring, given a little peace, always settles. There was nothing to do but allow the time it took. In an age that prizes doing above all else, this may be the hardest teaching of them all, that some things are healed not by our action but by our willingness to stop acting and let them be. At the heart of this stopping there is a small and gentle word, and the word is yes. When we are rowing, when we are stirring the water, there is always a quiet no running underneath it all. A no to how things are in this moment. A demand, however faint, that the present be other than it is, better than it is, further along than it is. That underground no is the engine of the rowing. And stopping, when we look closely, turns out to be the turning of that no into a yes. Not a grand yes, not glad approval of everything in our lives, not a pretense that all is well when it is not. Only a small and honest willingness to let this moment be as it already is, for now, without the constant effort to shove it toward the next one. In that yes, the oars go quiet, and the water, left alone, begins to clear. There is great relief in this, once we taste it, because saying yes to the moment is so much lighter than the endless labor of refusing it. The refusing was always the heavy part. A whole life can be spent in a low quarrel with the present, wishing it hurried, wishing it improved, leaning against it hour after hour, and that leaning is exhausting precisely because the present never yields. This moment is always, stubbornly, only itself. To stop pushing against it is to set down a weight we had carried so long we mistook it for the shape of our own hands. A useful thing to watch for, in this, is the attitude we quietly hold toward the present moment. Very often, if we look honestly, we find a small complaint folded into it, a low sense that our current state is not the right one, that we ought to be arranging ourselves into something calmer, something worthier than this. That complaint is a hand on the oar. And the remarkable thing is that simply seeing it can be enough to lift the oar clear of the water. Noticing the demand for what it is loosens its grip, and we find ourselves, with no further effort, drifting back toward the stillness that was never truly disturbed in the first place, only hidden for a while under our own waves. None of this is a technique to be drilled so much as a possibility to be remembered, again and again. In the middle of an ordinary day, when there is that familiar sense of striving, of leaning hard into the next thing, it is possible to feel the oars in our hands and, for a single breath, to simply lift them. To stop. Not to perform stillness as one more task, but to let go of the doing that has been hiding it. The waves we have been making will roll out and fade on their own, the way waves always do, and the surface will find its own smoothness, the way it always has, and the stars that were there the entire time will quietly show themselves in the settled water. Let us set the oars down for a moment now. Notice how you are, without changing a thing about it. And when it feels right, we will drift onward together. We come now to the hardest turn on the whole path, and also the most freeing. It is one thing to stop rowing when the water is merely choppy. It is another to stop when a storm is rising inside us. When grief comes, or fear, or a wave of anger, or an old ache we have spent years outrunning, the instinct is not to say yes. The instinct is to brace, to clamp down, to push the feeling back into the dark where it came from. And there is a reason for that instinct. Somewhere in us lives a quiet dread that if we truly let the difficult feeling in, if we stopped fighting it even for a moment, it would swallow us whole. That the grief would have no bottom, that the fear would never end. So we hold the door shut with all our strength, and we call this coping, and we grow very tired. The teaching we turn to now is gentle, and it runs against that instinct completely. It says that the yes we have been speaking of, the yes that lets the lake grow still, does not stop at pleasant weather. It extends even here, even to the storm. And what waits on the far side of that yes is not the annihilation we feared. It is something none of our bracing could ever have given us. There is a story from the mountains of Tibet that shows this better than any explanation. It concerns a hermit named Milarepa, who is remembered as one of the great awakened beings of that land. Milarepa lived alone in a cave high in the mountains, given over entirely to his practice. One day he went out to gather firewood, and when he came back, he found that his cave had been taken over by demons. Now, in the old telling, these are frightful things, but it is closer to the truth to say they were the troubles of his own mind, taken shape. They had made themselves at home. They lounged on his mat, they went through his few belongings, they filled his quiet cave with their restlessness. He stopped at the entrance, and his heart sank, and his very first thought was the thought any of us would have. I have to get these things out of here. So he tried. He rushed in, calling out, waving his arms, shooing them from one corner to another. The visitors were entirely unbothered. If anything, the harder he tried to drive them out, the more comfortable they grew, settling in deeper, as though his agitation were a warmth they were glad to gather around. He wore himself out, and not one of them had gone. He stopped to think, and he remembered that he was a man of the teachings, a man of compassion, not a man of shooing and shouting. So he tried a gentler way. He sat down before them and began to teach, speaking beautifully of kindness, of the passing nature of all things, of the deep truths he had given his life to. The visitors watched him with mild, patient faces and did not stir. When he finished, they were exactly where they had been. At last, emptied of every strategy, Milarepa let out a long breath and surrendered. "It seems we are going to be here together," he said quietly. "So be it. I open myself to whatever you have come to teach me." He stopped wanting them gone. He let them stay. And in that moment, all of them but one quietly faded away. One remained, the largest of them and the most stubborn, still sitting there in the middle of his cave. And Milarepa, having come this far, went the whole way. He walked up to it and offered himself completely, holding nothing back. "If there is something in you I still need to face," he said, "then here I am. I will not turn away from you." And at that the last one bowed and dissolved into open space, and the cave was his again, quiet and clear. The visitors in that cave were never invaders from outside. They were the contents of Milarepa's own mind made visible. His fears, his old wounds, the things in himself he had pushed down and turned away from for years. And they behaved exactly as our inner troubles behave. When he attacked them, they grew stronger. When he tried cleverly to talk them into leaving, dressing his resistance in wise and spiritual words, they saw through it and stayed. They fed on his resistance in whatever form it wore. Frustration or fine reasoning, it was all the same to them. It was all a way of saying no, and no was the very thing that kept them there. Only when the resistance stopped completely did they lose their hold. Not because he defeated them, but because he stopped fighting. The yes dissolved what no had held in place. And the last and most stubborn one, the one that remained, dissolved only when he offered it the most complete yes of all, when he stopped protecting himself from it entirely. This is the heart of the matter. What torments us is rarely the feeling itself. It is our war against the feeling. The grief is one thing. The refusal to grieve, the tightening against it, the years of holding it at arm's length, that is what exhausts a life. The fear passes through in waves, as all feelings do, but the fear of the fear can last for decades. Behind the difficult emotion stands a second, quieter suffering, and it is the suffering of resistance. And that second layer, unlike the first, is one we can set down. The Buddha described this with a simple image. When an arrow strikes us, he said, there is pain. That is the first arrow, and no one escapes it, for to be alive is to feel loss and fear and hurt. But then, he said, most of us take up a second arrow and strike ourselves again, in the very same spot. The second arrow is our reaction to the pain. It is the resistance, the resentment, the endless story about why this should not be happening, the struggle against what has already arrived. The first arrow is unavoidable. The second, he taught, is the one we add ourselves. And the whole of this teaching, the whole of Milarepa in his cave, is about laying down that second arrow. The visitors were the second arrow. The moment he stopped firing it, they had nothing left to feed on. There is a soft caution held in this story as well. Saying yes does not mean forcing ourselves to fling open every door at once. When a wound is very deep or very fresh, the yes can come slowly, gently, one small step at a time, and there is no need to face everything before we are ready. The path can be walked at whatever pace feels steady. What stays true is the direction of it. Sooner or later, ease is found in the yes and never in the endless bracing. There is another story of an ordinary person and not a famous saint that shows what the yes can open into. There was once a woman who went on a long retreat into silence, hoping to find some peace. For the first few days it went well enough. But as the silence deepened and there was nothing left to distract her, the things she had kept at bay for years began to rise. Old sorrows she thought she had finished with. Waves of anger with no clear cause. Fear that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Her mind churned, and her body filled with a restlessness she could barely sit still inside. It felt, she said later, as though a storm she had been holding back her whole life had finally broken loose. Her every instinct was to run, to pack her things and leave, to find any door out of what she was feeling. But she had no words to distract her and nowhere to go. So, with nothing else left to do, she began to do the one thing the teachings had offered her. She let it be. Whatever rose, she met it with the smallest, most trembling yes she could manage. Let this be here. Let this be here too. It was not easy, and it was not immediate. There was real fear in it, the old fear that if she let the storm move through her unopposed, it would tear her apart. But she kept returning to that small yes, again and again, hour after hour, letting the waves come without bracing against them, letting them rise and crest and move through her body and pass. And slowly, something began to change. She noticed that no wave, however large, actually destroyed her. Each one came and moved through and passed, and she was still there. The one saying yes was never harmed by anything it welcomed. And as she let go more and more deeply, as the fighting fell away, she began to feel underneath all the churning, a strange and growing spaciousness. A sense of room. It was as though she were discovering the space that had been holding the whole storm all along, and that space was not troubled by any of it. She said that at some point a deep current of joy began to rise in her, joy with no reason attached to it, welling up from somewhere beneath all the pain she had been so afraid of. She wanted to weep and laugh at once. She had touched something she had never touched before, a vast and living stillness that no wave could reach, and she realized it had been there the whole time, waiting beneath the very feelings she had spent her life running from. The waves had been playing on the surface. She was the depth of the sea. What that woman found is the promise hidden inside every difficult feeling, though we so rarely stay long enough to find it. The thing we brace against turns out to be the doorway. On the near side of it is the storm and our war against the storm. On the far side is a spaciousness that was there all along, quietly holding everything, unharmed by any of it. This matters because a certain kind of peace is thin and easily broken. It depends on nothing going wrong, on the water staying calm, and it shatters the moment life delivers something hard. But the stillness reached through yes is of another kind entirely. It has met the storm and been unshaken by it. It does not require the waves to stop. It is wide enough to hold them, the way the ocean holds its own surface. That is a peace that can weather a life. There is a distinction here that Buddhism draws with great care, because it is easy to go wrong. Emptiness, in the tradition, is one of the deepest of all teachings, but it is often misunderstood. The word can make it sound as though the goal were a cold, blank void, a place where nothing matters and nothing is felt. A person can chase that misunderstanding into a kind of detachment that is really just numbness, holding the world at arm's length until nothing can touch them, and mistaking that deadness for peace. But this is what the teachers warned against as a partial and lifeless view. In the Mahayana teachings, true emptiness is never separate from compassion. It is said that emptiness and compassion arise together, two faces of one realization, and that a realized heart pours out warmth for all beings precisely because it has seen through the illusion of separateness. The Bodhisattva, the ideal figure of that path, does not withdraw from the world into a cool remove. Having seen the empty nature of things, the Bodhisattva turns back toward the world with boundless tenderness for it. So the stillness that opens through yes is the opposite of cold. When the heart truly says yes and stays open, the silence it finds is empty the way the sky is empty, which is to say it has room for everything, and it teems with life. The woman on the retreat did not go numb. She found joy welling up, an aliveness she wanted to sing. That is the mark of the real thing. True stillness does not deaden us to life. It returns us to it more fully than before. In daily living, this asks nothing dramatic. It is a small and repeated willingness. When a difficult feeling arrives, and the old instinct to slam the door rises up with it, there is another possibility. To soften just slightly. To let the feeling be here, for now, without the whole machinery of resistance grinding into motion. Not to invite pain or to seek it out, but simply to stop adding the second arrow of struggle to the first arrow of the feeling itself. Often that small softening is enough to begin the settling. The wave, allowed to move, moves. And underneath it, always, is the depth that was never disturbed. Let us rest here a little while. Whatever is present, let it simply be present, and take one soft breath. When you feel ready, we will go on together. There is a subtle mistake that even devoted practitioners make, and it can quietly undo years of effort. It is the belief that quiet means the absence of sound. Holding that belief, a person sits down to meditate and treats every noise as an enemy. A dog barking, a door closing, a car passing in the street, each becomes an intrusion, a thing standing between them and the peace they are seeking. And so they wait, tense and irritated, for the world to fall silent, so that their real practice can finally begin. But the world does not fall silent, and the waiting itself becomes a kind of noise. There is a gentler and truer understanding, and it changes everything. Sounds are not the enemy of silence. Sounds arise out of silence, the way waves arise out of the sea. The silence we are looking for is not somewhere beyond the sounds, on the far side of them, waiting for them to stop. It is right here, underneath them, holding them, the space in which every sound appears and into which every sound dissolves. Think of a single bell struck in a still temple. The sound rises up out of the quiet, swells, rings out, and then slowly fades, thinning and thinning until it melts back into the silence it came from. Where did the sound begin? And where did the silence end? The two are not at war. The silence was the ground the whole time. The bell simply gave it a voice for a moment. And when the ringing dies away, the silence is not something new that arrives. It is what was there all along, now audible again, having never truly left. This is why a struck bell can quiet a restless mind more surely than any command to be still. We do not chase the fading sound and we do not push it away. We simply follow it down, softer and softer, as it returns to its source, and our attention is drawn along with it into the quiet beneath. The sound leads us home. It was never the obstacle. It was the guide. The Zen tradition understood this so well that its masters used sound itself as a doorway into the silence. There is a story about a teacher who taught a restless student exactly this. A young monk came to a mountain temple, earnest and troubled. He wanted, more than anything, to find the deep stillness he had heard the masters speak of. But his mind was loud, and worse, the temple was not the silent refuge he had imagined. It sat above a village. All day there were sounds. The villagers calling to one another, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, children at play, carts on the road, roosters, dogs, the whole clamor of ordinary life drifting up the mountainside. The young monk grew frustrated. He went to the old master and complained, "How can anyone find silence in this place? From dawn to dusk there is noise. The village never rests. I came here for quiet, and instead my ears are full of the world." The master listened, and then he said, "Go up to the little hut on the ridge above the temple. Stay there for 3 days. Do not try to shut out the sounds of the village. Do not block your ears or fight what you hear. Instead, listen to all of it. Listen so completely that you hear not only each sound, but the silence around each sound. Come back when you have found it." The young monk was puzzled, but he obeyed. He climbed to the little hut and sat, and at first it was as maddening as ever. Every sound snagged at him. He caught himself, again and again, wishing the village would be quiet. But he had been told not to fight, so each time he let the wish go and simply listened. And slowly, over the first day and into the second, something in his hearing began to change. He stopped bracing against the sounds and started to receive them. He noticed that each sound had an edge, a moment where it began, rising up out of stillness. And each had an ending, a moment where it faded and returned to stillness. He began to hear the silence out of which the blacksmith's hammer rang, and the silence into which it fell between blows. He heard the quiet that framed a child's shout, before and after. He heard that every single sound in the whole noisy valley was floating in an ocean of silence, arising from it and dissolving back into it, and that the silence was never once disturbed by any of them. It held them all, easily, the way the sky holds birds. On the third day he came down from the ridge, and he was changed. He bowed to the master. "I understand now," he said. "I was listening for silence in the wrong place. I thought it was behind the sounds, but it is inside them. It was here the whole time, and the noise of the village was never keeping me from it. The noise was floating in it." The master smiled. "The village never stopped," he said. "Only your war with it did." The young monk had been doing what most of us do. He was waiting for the world to arrange itself into perfect quiet before he would allow himself to rest. And the world will never do that. There will always be sound, always something arising. If our peace depends on silence, in that outer sense, on the dog not barking and the car not passing, then our peace is at the mercy of every passing noise, and we will never have it for long. But when we understand that silence is the ground beneath all sound, everything relaxes. We no longer need the world to stop. We can rest in the stillness right in the middle of a noisy day, because the stillness is not the absence of the noise. It is the vast, quiet awareness in which the noise is happening. A sound cannot break silence any more than a bird can break the sky. The bird flies through, and the sky is untouched. The sound rings out, and the silence remains exactly what it was. And what is true of sound is true of thought, which we touched on much earlier in our journey. Even when thoughts are moving, there can be a deep undercurrent of stillness beneath them, an ocean of silence with waves passing across the surface. We do not have to wait for the thinking to stop any more than we have to wait for the village to stop. We can notice the quiet space in which the thoughts are arising and rest there, letting the thoughts come and go like sounds, none of them able to disturb the depth in which they float. This is worth resting on because it lifts an impossible burden. So many people believe they are failing at inner quiet because their thoughts have not stopped. They sit, the thoughts keep coming, and they conclude that stillness is beyond them. But stillness was never the stopping of thought. A person can have a mind full of passing thoughts and still be resting in profound silence, exactly as the sea can have a surface full of waves and still be, in its vast body, deep and undisturbed. The waves are on the surface. The depth is untouched. We are not the waves. We are the water, and the water is still no matter what the surface is doing. To know this is to be free of the exhausting demand that the mind falls silent before we can rest. We can rest now, thoughts and all. There is one more obstacle worth naming, subtle and easy to miss. Very often, once we have grown a little quiet, we begin to wait. We sit in the stillness, and some part of us leans forward, expecting something to happen, some special experience to arrive, some grand event. And that very waiting keeps us on the surface. There is a story about this too. There was a woman who had practiced for many years and who had a good and steady stillness in her sitting. But she felt she had come up against a wall. She could grow calm, she could quiet her mind, and yet always she felt she was on the edge of something she could not quite enter, a door she could not quite pass through. She went to an old teacher and described her trouble. "I become quiet," she said. "I settle, and then I sit at the threshold of something deeper and I wait for it to open. But it never opens. I have waited for years." The teacher nodded slowly. "You have described your problem exactly," he said. "You are waiting." She did not understand. "As long as you are waiting," the teacher said, "you are leaning toward a moment that has not come. You are living at the edge of the next thing, expecting it to arrive. But the depth you are seeking is not in the next moment. It is in this one, the one you keep leaning out of. Stop waiting, and you will already have arrived. The waiting is the only thing keeping you at the threshold." The woman went away and sat, and this time, when the familiar stillness came, she noticed the subtle forward lean of her expectation, that quiet, reaching for something more. And she let it go. She stopped waiting for anything to happen. She stopped expecting a door to open and simply let herself be fully in the quiet that was already there, asking nothing of it. And in that release, without any event, without any grand arrival, she sank at last into the depth she had been circling for years. There had never been a door. There had only been her waiting in front of a threshold she was already standing well past. The waiting that woman discovered is one we all know. When you are are waiting, even for peace itself. You are on the periphery, leaning toward a future moment, and you cannot sink into the present because part of you is always slightly ahead of it. When the waiting stops, there is a natural settling, a sinking down into the depth of what is already here. Nothing needs to arrive because what we were waiting for was never going to come from ahead. It was underneath us the whole time, waiting for us to stop leaning forward long enough to fall into it. This is why the deepest stillness is not something we produce or achieve. It is something we relax into once we stop demanding that it be anywhere other than here, once we stop needing the sounds to cease or the special moment to come. The silence is not waiting at the end of the path. It is the ground the path is made of. In ordinary days, this can be a great relief. There is no need to seek out a silent room, and no need to wait for one. In the middle of noise, in the middle of an ordinary, busy afternoon, the still awareness in which all of it is happening is fully available. The sounds of a household, of traffic, of voices, none of them are obstacles. Each one is arising in the very silence we are looking for, and can even serve as a reminder of it. To hear a sound and sense the quiet it floats in, that is enough. We were never as far from stillness as the noise led us to believe. Let us pause together for a moment, resting in the quiet that holds whatever sounds are here. And when it feels right, we will continue on. When the inner noise settles and we begin to rest in the quiet we have been circling all evening, something unexpected happens. The stillness does not stay locked inside us, private and self-contained. It begins to change the way we see everything around us. It flows outward, and it comes out as a kind of tenderness. This surprises people. We tend to imagine that turning inward, seeking silence, is a movement away from the world, a retreat into ourselves. And so we half expect the deeply quiet person to be distant, cool, wrapped up in their own peace. But the opposite is what actually happens. The Buddha, after his long silence beneath the tree, did not stay there. He rose and walked the roads of India for 45 years, teaching anyone who would listen, moved by compassion for the suffering of others. The silence did not close him off. It opened his heart to the whole world. There is a reason for this, and it lies at the very center of the teaching. Most of our hardness toward others, our judgment, our impatience, our sense of separation, is manufactured by the busy, divided mind. It sorts the world into friend and stranger, useful and useless, mine and not mine, and it defends the small territory of the self against all the rest. When that sorting quiets, when the walls of the self grow thin, what naturally flows into the space is a sense of connection. We begin to feel, rather than merely believe, that we are not separate from the life around us. And you cannot feel your deep kinship with something and remain indifferent to it. The Buddha gave this a name. He called it metta, which we might translate as loving kindness, and he taught that it is not a special virtue we must strain to produce. It is what the heart does on its own once it is no longer clenched. There is a well-loved teaching of his in which he says that just as a mother would protect her only child with her life, so should we cultivate a boundless heart toward all beings. That boundlessness is the natural climate of a quiet mind. The tradition speaks of 4 qualities that flow from a settled heart and calls them the 4 immeasurables, the 4 boundless states. The first is loving kindness, the simple wish that beings be well. The second is compassion, the heart's tender response to suffering. The third is a quiet joy in the good fortune of others, gladness that is not spoiled by envy. And the fourth is a deep evenness, a steadiness that can hold all of it without being tossed about. What is striking about these four is that they are called immeasurable, boundless, without edge. They do not stop at the people we happen to like. Left to its own nature, the open heart does not draw a circle around a few and shut the rest out. It reaches as far as awareness reaches, which is to say, everywhere. And this is not something we manufacture by trying harder to be good. It is something we uncover, the way we uncover the still lake beneath the churning. Quiet the churning, and the boundless warmth is simply there, as it always was. There is a story that shows how much of what we meet in the world is really a reflection of what we carry within us. Let us explore a story about a traveler and a wise woman who kept a small tea house at a crossroads outside a walled town. The town sat where several roads met, and travelers were always passing through it, some staying, some moving on. The woman had lived at the crossroads for many years, and she had a gift for listening, so travelers often stopped to rest at her little house and talk before deciding whether to settle in the town or continue on their way. One afternoon, a traveler arrived, dusty and scowling, and sat down heavily. "I am thinking of settling in this town," he said. "Tell me, what are the people like here?" The woman poured him tea. "What were the people like in the town you have just come from?" she asked. The traveler's face darkened. "Cold, selfish, every one of them out for himself. They cheated me, they gossiped behind my back, and not one of them showed me a moment's true kindness. That is why I left. I could not wait to be gone." The woman nodded slowly. "I am sorry to tell you," she said, "but I think you will find the people of this town much the same. Cold and selfish, just as you describe. You would do better to keep traveling." The traveler grumbled, finished his tea, and went on his way, grumbling still. Some hours later, another traveler came down the same road and stopped at the tea house, footsore but pleasant of face. "I am thinking of settling in this town," she said. "Can you tell me what the people are like here?" Again, the woman poured tea and asked her question. "What were the people like in the town you have just left?" The traveler's face softened at the memory. "Oh, they were good people. Warm. We looked out for one another. There were quarrels, of course, as everywhere, but underneath there was real kindness. I will miss them. I am only leaving because my work calls me on." The woman smiled. "I am glad to tell you," she said, "that you will find the people of this town much the same. Warm and good-hearted, just as you describe. You will be very welcome here." Now, a boy who helped the woman in the tea house had heard both conversations, and he was confused. "How can this be?" he asked, when the second traveler had gone. "To the first you said the people here were cold and selfish. To the second you said they were warm and kind. It is the same town. How can both be true?" The woman set down her pot. "Each of them," she said, "will find exactly what they brought with them. The first man carried coldness in his own heart, and everywhere he goes, he will meet it in the faces of others because he is looking through it. The second carried warmth, and she will meet warmth for the same reason. The town does not change. What changes is the eyes that see it." The world we walk through is colored far more than we realize, by what we carry within us. When our inner state is hard and grasping and afraid, the world appears full of threats and slights, and we meet it braced for battle. When our inner state is quiet and open, the very same world appears full of warmth and possibility. The town does not change. The eyes change. This is why inner silence expresses itself as reverence. When the mind grows quiet and the fearful sorting stops, we begin to look upon the world with kinder eyes, not because we have forced ourselves to be nice, but because the distortion has cleared. We are seeing more truly, and the truth of things, seen clearly, calls forth tenderness. The Buddha taught that the deepest seeing and the deepest compassion arise together. To see a person truly beneath our story of them is already to feel with them. There is one more thing the quiet reveals, and it may be the most beautiful of all. It reveals that everything belongs. Because we are no longer pushing any part of our experience away, we begin to feel that all of it, the whole moving world, is somehow of a piece with us, arising from the same silence we are. Nothing is foreign. Nothing is left out. There is a small story that holds this whole understanding in a single gesture. There is a story of a man who came to a revered teacher in some distress, complaining that he could not feel the connection to life that the teachings promised. "I sit," he said, "and I grow calm enough. But I feel separate from everything. The people around me, the world outside my door, all of it feels far away, on the other side of a wall. I long to feel that I belong to it, and I do not. What practice will break down the wall?" The teacher thought for a moment, then said, "Come, walk with me." They walked out into the evening, along a path at the edge of a field, and the teacher said nothing for a long while. He simply walked, unhurried, and let the man walk beside him. The light was going golden and low. A small wind moved across the field. After a time, the teacher said quietly, "Do you feel the wind?" "Yes," said the man. "Notice that it does not choose. It touches the tall grass and the low grass. It touches the ant on the stalk and the bird overhead. It touches your face and mine, and the leaves, and the water in the ditch, all the same, all without preference. It leaves nothing out." They walked on a little further. "The wall you speak of," the teacher said, "is not between you and the world. There is no such wall. The wall is a thought that says, 'I am in here and the world is out there.' When you grow quiet enough, you stop believing that thought for a moment. And in that moment you notice what was always true. The same life that moves in the wind moves in you. The same stillness that holds the field holds you. You do not need to break down the wall. You need only stop building it, breath by breath, and notice that everything already belongs to everything else, and that you were never once outside of it." The man stood in the field as the light faded and felt the wind touch his face, the same wind that touched the grass and the water and the wing of a bird crossing the darkening sky. And for the first time in a very long while, he did not feel separate from any of it. That is the quiet gift of inner silence, extended outward. It does not wall us off from the world. It dissolves the wall we did not know we were building. Everything the light touches, everything the wind moves through, all of it belongs, and we belong with it, part of one seamless, living whole. There is an image from the old teachings that holds this beautifully. It speaks of a vast net that stretches through all of existence, and at every crossing point of the net there hangs a single clear jewel. And because each jewel is perfectly clear, it reflects every other jewel in the whole net. Look into any one of them, and you see all the others shining there within it. Nothing stands alone. Each thing contains, in its own way, the reflection of everything else. This is not a poetic exaggeration, but a description of how life actually is, one endless web of relationship in which nothing exists by itself and everything holds everything else. When we grow quiet enough, we stop feeling like a single separate jewel, cut off and alone, and begin to sense the whole shining net of which we have always been one small, luminous point. This is why the deepest peace is never cold or withdrawn. The person who has come home to the silence does not love the world less. They love it more, and more freely, because they are no longer defending themselves against it. They can cherish the ordinary miracle of an ordinary day, the light on a wall, a familiar face, the sound of rain, because they have stopped rushing past it all towards something else. The Buddha's boundless heart, the mother's care for her only child extended to all beings, is not a distant ideal. It is simply what a quiet, unwalled heart feels naturally when nothing is being pushed away. In ordinary life, this needs no special effort. It is more a matter of noticing the moments when the wall thins on its own. A moment of unexpected tenderness toward a stranger. A sudden gladness at the sight of the sky. A softening towards someone we had been quick to judge. These are not sentimental accidents. They are the natural fragrance of a heart grown briefly quiet, glimpses of the kinship that is always there beneath our sense of separateness, waiting only for the noise to settle so it can be felt. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the quiet and feel how it reaches outward, and take one easy breath. When you are ready, we will go on together. We have traveled a long way together tonight, and we arrive now at a simple question. What does the silence actually give us? We have spoken of coming home to it, of stopping, of saying yes, of the tenderness it opens toward the world. But if we could name the deepest gift of inner quiet, the thing it offers that nothing else can, what would it be? The tradition gives a clear answer, and it may be surprising. The deepest gift of silence is wisdom. Not cleverness, not knowledge, not the accumulation of facts and opinions, but a different kind of knowing altogether, one that does not come from thinking at all. We are used to believing that understanding comes from mental effort. We turn a problem over, we analyze, we reason, we work it out. And for many things, this serves us well. A sharp, clear, analytical mind is a wonderful instrument, and there is nothing in these teachings against it. But there is a deeper kind of understanding that thinking cannot reach, a seeing into the truth of things that arrives only when the thinking grows quiet. Krishnamurti, one of the great teachers of the last century, pointed to this again and again. He said that it is only when the mind becomes still, not seeking, not resisting, that something new can be perceived, and that it is truth itself that liberates us, not our effort to become free. Consider how often our best understanding has actually come to us. Rarely in the middle of hard mental labor. More often it arrives sideways, in a quiet moment, when we had stopped working at the problem. The answer we had chased all day appears while we are washing a bowl, or walking, or lying awake in the small hours with the mind finally still. We say, "It came to us," and the phrase is exact. We did not seize it. It arrived into a space that had grown quiet enough to receive it. The thinking mind, for all its gifts, is a little like a hand grasping at water. The harder it closes, the less it holds. Wisdom is not grasped. It is received in the open palm of a quiet mind. This is a great relief when we understand it. It means the deepest wisdom is not reserved for the cleverest among us. It is available to anyone who can grow quiet. There is an old story that captures this exactly. Let us explore a story about a group of students at a great academy in an ancient land, and an examination that tested more than knowledge. At the end of a long course of study, the students were gathered for their final examination. They were given a difficult and beautiful question to write upon, a question about the deepest nature of reality, and they were given the whole afternoon to answer it. Pens were dipped and heads bent, and the great hall filled with the scratching of writing, as student after student poured out everything they had learned. They filled page after page, marshalling every argument, every quotation, every subtle distinction they had spent years acquiring. All but one. A single student sat quietly at his place by the window, and he did not write. He gazed out at the courtyard, at the light in the trees, and he was still. The hours passed, and the other students wrote furiously, glancing now and then at the motionless young man with a mixture of pity and scorn, certain he had frozen, certain he would fail. When only a few minutes remained, the examiner came and stood beside the still student and looked down at his empty paper. "You have written nothing," the examiner said, not unkindly. "The papers will be collected very soon." The young man nodded. He dipped his pen at last, and in the little time that remained, he wrote a single line. Then he set down his pen and handed in his paper. The other students handed in their many pages, confident and exhausted. And when the papers were read, it was the single line, written by the still student, that was judged the finest answer of all. His teachers spoke of it for years afterward. Where the others had written everything they knew, he had written the one thing he had seen. And what he had seen had not come from the effort of writing. It had come from the quiet of the long afternoon, from the stillness in which he had simply looked and let the truth show itself. Wisdom of that kind does not come from a straining, churning mind. It does not come from piling up more and more thoughts. It comes, when it comes, from stillness, from a mind quiet enough to reflect the truth, the way a calm lake reflects the moon. This is why every contemplative tradition, in every land, has treasured silence. Not because silence is empty, but because it is the condition in which the deepest things become visible. The thinking mind is a fine servant, but it cannot see what only stillness can reveal. There is an old distinction that helps here. There is knowledge, and there is wisdom, and they are not the same. Knowledge is a matter of accumulation. We gather it, we store it, we can lose it, and gather more. It fills the mind the way water fills a jar. Wisdom is different. Wisdom is not a thing we collect, but a clarity we uncover, and it comes not by adding, but by removing, by letting the mud settle until the water goes clear. A person can be immensely learned and not at all wise, their mind so crowded with borrowed knowledge that there is no room left for direct seeing. And a person of very few words, who has grown deeply quiet, can carry a wisdom that no library could hold. The still student by the window had less on his page than anyone in the hall. He had more in his heart, because he had made room for it. This is the strange economy of the inner life. We grow richer by growing emptier, and we come to see most clearly when we have stopped straining to look. And here we arrive at the very heart of everything we have explored tonight, the final gift, the one all the others were pointing toward. When the mind at last grows truly quiet, and we do not disturb that quiet but simply rest in it, we discover that the silence is not empty and cold. It is alive. It is full of a light and a warmth we had never known, and yet, the moment we touch it, we recognize it at once as our own deepest nature. Nisargadatta, a teacher of great depth, described this as clearly as it has ever been described. When the mind is kept from its preoccupations, he said, it becomes quiet. And if we do not disturb that quiet, but stay in it, we find it is permeated with a light and a love we have never known, and yet we recognize it immediately as our own true nature. Once we have passed through this, he said, we are never quite the same again. Notice the two things he says together, for they are the whole of it. The light and the love are something we have never known, and yet we recognize them at once as our own. Both are true, and their meeting is the great surprise of the inner life. What we find in the depths of silence is utterly new, more beautiful, and more intimate than anything the noisy mind ever offered us. And at the very same time, it is the most familiar thing there is, more ours than our own name, because it is what we have been all along, underneath everything. It is like a person who has been searching everywhere for their own eyes, and finally stops and realizes they have been looking through them the whole time. The seeking felt like a journey outward. The finding is a turning around and a recognition. This is the great homecoming the whole path has been leading toward. There is a final story, very simple, that points to this recognition, this sense of arriving at something that was ours all along. There is a tale of a young woman who left her village and traveled the world for many years in search of a great and secret treasure she had heard of since childhood. It was said to be the most precious thing in existence, a jewel of boundless light, and she gave her whole youth to the search for it. She crossed deserts and climbed mountains. She studied with famous teachers who told her the treasure lay in distant lands, and she went to those lands and found it was not there. She grew older on the road and wiser in many things, but the great treasure eluded her at every turn. Wherever she arrived, she was told it lay somewhere further on. At last, weary and grey, she gave up the search. She went home to the village she had left so long ago, not to find anything, but simply because she was tired, and it was the only place left to go. She came to the small house of her childhood, and she sat down by the cold hearth where her mother had once tended the fire, and she rested at last, wanting nothing, seeking nothing. And there, in the stillness of giving up, sitting quietly in the one place she had never thought to look, she felt it. A warmth, a light, welling up from somewhere within her, filling the little room and filling her heart. It was the treasure. It had no shape and no price, and it was unmistakably the very thing she had crossed the whole world to find. It had been within her the entire time, waiting, through all her seeking, through all her wandering. She had carried it out the door with her the day she left, and carried it home again, and only now, in the quiet, still enough to feel it, did she know it for what it was. She wept, not from sorrow, but because she was home, and the home was herself. That is the deepest gift of silence, and the truth these teachings have circled all evening. What we are looking for, we are looking with. The peace, the light, the love we have sought in 1,000 places is our own nature, closer than our own breath, and it was never once absent. It only waited, quiet beneath the noise, for us to grow still enough to notice it. We do not become silence. We were never anything else. Beneath every thought we have ever had, beneath every story of who we are, beneath all the searching and striving of a whole life, there is a still and luminous awareness, awake, at peace, and utterly at home. It has been here the whole time, holding everything, asking nothing. To come home to it is not to gain something new. It is to recognize what we have always been. The poet Rumi, who wrote so often and so beautifully of silence, said that our old life was a frantic running from the quiet, and that when we finally stop running and grow still, we are like someone born at last into color, stepping out of a narrow room into the open air. That is the feeling of it. Not the loss of anything, but an immense arrival. The walls we had lived inside were only ever made of noise, and when the noise settles, they were never really there. What remains is spacious and bright and unmistakably our own. And so the path ends where it began, in stillness, though we see that stillness now with different eyes. The frantic search was itself the only thing that ever hid the treasure. When the search grows quiet, the treasure shines out on its own, and we understand at last that we were home the whole time, and simply too busy running to notice. In the days to come, there is nothing to achieve and nothing to force. It is enough, now and then, to grow quiet, to let the noise settle, and to rest for a moment in the silence that we are. Everything else follows from that. The wisdom, the tenderness, the peace, all of it flows from the still and living quiet at the center of us, which was never far away and never anything other than ourselves. Let us rest here together one last time. Let everything be just as it is, and take one slow, easy breath and let it go. And when you are ready, we will bring our evening gently to a close. We have come to the end of our time together tonight. We began with a longing, the quiet ache for stillness that lives in almost everyone. And we have seen, along the way, that the stillness we longed for was never far off. It was not a distant place, a perfect room, or a state of mind reserved for someone calmer and wiser than we are. It was our own nature all along, waiting beneath the noise, as patient as the earth beneath a restless road. We saw that the busy mind was never the enemy, that thoughts are as natural as breath, and that peace comes not from defeating them, but from ceasing the war. We saw how easily a thought can become a world, how a rope can become a snake in dim light, and how the stories we repeat can grow so familiar that we forget they are stories at all. And we learned that one honest moment of seeing can loosen what years of struggle could not. The rope remains a rope. The mind remains a mind. And we are free to rest again in what is actually here. We learn, too, that we are not the small descriptions we carry. We are not only the name, the history, the role, the wound, or the hope. All of these belong to us, and none of them contains us. Beneath every costume there is something quiet and open, the awareness that has watched every chapter come and go without becoming trapped inside any one of them. It was present in childhood. It is present now. It has been with us through every change, not asking to be improved, not needing to be defended. We found that listening opens a door, that slowing down allows the world to come forward, and that stopping reveals a stillness we could never have forced. We learn to say yes to what is, even when what is does not match what we hoped for. We saw that acceptance is not defeat. It is the laying down of an argument with a moment that has already arrived. And when that argument ends, even briefly, life becomes simple again. Breath, weight, sound, warmth, the quiet fact of being here. And we saw that silence does not close the heart. It opens it. The quieter we become, the less separate we feel. The suffering of others is no longer happening at some safe distance. Their joy is no longer something that takes from our own. In the stillness beneath the story of me and mine, life recognizes life. Compassion becomes less like a duty and more like the natural movement of an open hand. Now there is nothing more you need to understand tonight. Nothing needs to be remembered in the right order. Nothing needs to be carried away as a lesson. Let the stories, teachings, and images settle where they will. What matters does not depend on memory. The deepest things work more quietly than that. They sink beneath words, the way rain enters the ground, and they wait there without announcement. Tomorrow, something from this evening may return in an ordinary moment. A kettle, a footstep, rain at a window. For one breath, there may be only the sound or only the step. That will be enough. Stillness does not ask you to withdraw from life. It enters the way you walk, listen, answer, and begin again. You may also forget all of this. That, too, is all right. Silence does not depend on your remembering it. The sky does not vanish when the clouds cover it, and the depth of the lake is not lost because the wind has crossed its surface. There will be noisy mornings, crowded afternoons, and nights when the mind refuses to lie down. None of these are failures. Stillness is not a reward for having a quiet day. It is the space in which the quiet and the noise both happen. So when the mind is busy again, as it will be, you do not need to begin another battle. You can let it move. Let it count, rehearse, imagine, warn, and wander. You can listen to it as you might listen to rain passing over a roof. Some drops strike loudly. Some barely touch. None remain. Beneath them, the house stands. Beneath thought, awareness remains exactly where it has always been. There will still be choices to make and losses to meet. There will be mornings of confidence and mornings of doubt. The path does not promise that every difficulty will disappear. It offers something more durable, the discovery that difficulty is not the whole of what is here. Around every sorrow there is space. Beneath every fear there is awareness. Within even the most crowded hour, there is one breath arriving without effort, one sound appearing and fading, one moment that asks only to be met. You do not have to hold on to peace. The attempt to hold it would only tighten the hand again. Let peace come and go as every feeling comes and goes. What you are is deeper than the feeling of peace. It is the openness that knows peace when it is present and knows restlessness when restlessness returns. The surface changes. The knowing remains. You do not need to become a silent person or build a new identity around stillness. Let this breath prove nothing. So let this evening end without effort. Let the words grow faint. Let the voice become one more sound dissolving into the room. Feel the weight of the body being received by whatever is beneath it. Feel how the earth is carrying you without instruction. You have been carried this way all day, through every thought and every task, and even now there is nothing you need to do to be held. If the eyes are still open, they may soften. If they are closed, let the darkness be simple. There is no need to search inside it. Let the breath find its own depth. Let the face loosen around the eyes and mouth. Let the tongue rest. Let the hands be empty. The day has asked enough of them. Whatever was unfinished can remain unfinished for now. The world will still be there in the morning, and you will meet it with whatever strength the night gives you. No problem is improved by carrying it through every hour of sleep. Set down what can be set down, and what cannot yet be set down can simply be allowed to rest beside you without being solved. Imagine, for a moment, a temple courtyard after everyone has gone. The last lamp is burning low. The stones still hold a little warmth from the day. Somewhere beyond the wall, water moves in the dark. Nothing in the courtyard is trying to be peaceful. The lamp does not strain to shine. The water does not practice flowing. The night does not work at being quiet. Everything is simply fulfilling its nature. You belong to that same life. Breath moving, heart beating, awareness open. No separate effort is required. Carry the quiet with you, though there is no need to carry it far. It is already present in the pause before the next thought, in the space around the next sound, in the stillness beneath the next step. It asks nothing, and it is always near. Rest now. Let everything be just as it is. Let this moment be complete without adding anything to it. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.